Gentle listener, alas, it is time. I have dubbed this channel Baldermort's Guides to Warhammer, as I must now live up to this name. I've unveiled the longest second to you, but now, finally, we must go further. We must go to that place that no Warhammer fan, no wargamer who knows of it, can bear to go. I must now unleash upon you the deepest terror in the hearts of all gamers. I will apologize to you now, gentle listener, for it is a thing of horror. I implore you not to listen to this entry if you are alone, or not of sound and stable mind and mood. The effects could be dire. Now that you have been warned, been given the opportunity to turn back from this dark pathway, let us tread it together, come what may. There is one terror that haunts the nights of every enthusiast, stalks their dreams, and turns them to nightmares. One secret dread that can make the fan sheets a quagmire of salted sweat, pooled into saturation with the tears of the mind given form by the glands. One that can make a gamer scream and sit bolt upright, staring wide-eyed and panting like they have no way to ever fill their lungs again. A horror that hath but 5 words. It is the reason that the veteran will click all too quickly, or cause them to hesitate for a moment, just a moment, before they enter the Warhammer Community Update or rumor sites. Its power knows no bounds, and no amount of reason, analysis, or even insider knowledge can ever truly exorcise its shadow, the spectre of it, the cold chill of its touch on the heart, mind, and soul. Like the very fates sent to torment Orestes, the fear is ever present, ever just outside the periphery of vision, but whose shadow can always be felt, like a skeletal hand of the Grim Reaper hovering over your shoulder, so you can feel the cold, almost hear the click of the boned fingers preparing to tap you on the shoulder, but never quite making contact. For it is a fear that few can bring to pass their lips. Those 5 dreaded words that mean so much. Whether read or heard, no fan can ever totally and truly defeat the splinter in the mind that bellows into their soul that they are not immune to it. For all know, it may only be a matter of time. Its foul genesis was in the year of our Lord 1990, but none truly understood its power, not then. Passed off as temporary or an omission, but it was all too real. None then could understand how it would grow to become a terrifying reality. And it hath struck down more than people may wish to ever acknowledge. For a time it slept, before the turn of the century. The foulness was not seen or heard of, and it was thought to have been banished, never to return. Its sting was felt less keenly, its power reduced. For nearly a decade and a half, but it merely slumbered. And it had lost none of its power in its recline, for it returned in Anno Domini 2015, and it struck hard, initially felling 2 mighty titans. But it has ever after gained in power. In official parlance it has changed, and been rebranded or reinvented, but to the fan, to the enthusiast, no matter how they change the tenor or tone, for it may go under many guises, it is, at its root, the same. It is terror clothed, fear unfettered, and conjured to stark reality. Those 5 words. I fear to say them, gentle listener, lest the curse be visited upon me, but you must know. gird thyself, for I must speak them. Now, I intone them. Emperor, protect my soul. Your army is being squatted. But what does this arcane phrase of power, this spine-chilling term mean? Let me tell you, gentle listener. In the beginning, when Warhammer 40k was released in the form of a book, a grand tome of rules and stories, the very genesis of Warhammer 40k, it was not as it is today, but nor were the times. The text was called Rogue Trader. It was large, it was detailed, and it contained a set of rules that were more akin to a role-playing game than the format of the war game that we know today. It was envisioned as requiring a games master, the equivalent of a dungeon master, who'd use the rules to narrate and create a cohesive story of a warband, army, or even just a freebooting pirate with a retinue of any of a wide expanse of different units, races, warriors, and weapons, called, predictably enough, a rogue trader. The game was, at that time, seen as nothing more than a way to hijack the popular resurgence of interest in sci-fi that had been breathed new life by the Star Wars saga and the enduring but resurrected interest in Dune, the book, if not the film. It was linked with the dark dystopias projected in such comics as 2000 AD and its flagship character, Judge Dredd. So a game called Laserburn was taken and moulded and reforged, and Rick Priestley, Emperor hallow his name, and wrote the framework of the galaxy all of our armies and characters now inhabit. It is honestly surprising how little things have changed from that initial treatise, in mood and narrative and style, despite how much the game and hobby itself has mutated and evolved into that which we know today. So, Rogue Trader and Warhammer 40k were born. But they were seen by all too many as a smaller, less satisfying and inevitably doomed sibling to the mighty Warhammer fantasy line. How wrong we all were then. So, to capture the existing fans of Warhammer Fantasy, while pragmatically branching out into sci-fi, there were equivalents to most of the fantasy lines, races, cultures, and armies that were the typical fare of Warhammer. Humans had the armoured space marines, who were the epitome of the heraldic knight. The Eldar were elves, who were waning and few in number, much like the fantasy universe, based on the template of the works of Professor Tolkien as it was. And like that world, humanity and Eldar would work closely at points against common enemies and, of course, the orcs. Back then, like in fantasy, the orcs were the great threat that was to be the main foil of many an army. But the story format of the game and the consecutive nature of encounters forming a narrative, a story, also included entries for monsters and dangerous and malign flora and fauna. And in those days, there was a place for the squats. They were called Homo sapiens rotundus, because there was a strong element of tongue-in-cheek mischief in the entire thing. Back then, Warhammer 40k did not take itself too seriously, and the concept of the grimdark that we know today was not as developed. Oh, the writing in Rogue Trader was exactly reflective of the cold, sterile, pitiless and hopeless universe we all know and have come to love. But there was levity and jocularity in the units, the adventures and the models themselves. It was a more jovial period, and a more light-hearted pastime. That said, it was not as entrancing or vibrant as it is today. The squats, the space dwarves as they were called, were oddities and very amusing. They rode on trikes and their attire was that of short but stout bikers, Hell's Angels. Their helmets festooned with horns that you would only now see on the orcs in the 21st century lines of models. They were doughty and stern warriors and had expansive history and seemed fully developed, with near 10 units and the ability to be opted into any Imperial Guard army, the name of the Astra Militarum, before litigation caused Games Workshop to rebrand everything. They seemed to be made to last and here to stay. With them were another army that had disappeared, another faction that seemed so fleshed out and here to stay also, the Slann. Sales were meagre, as they were never the most popular of lines, but they were there. None could know the darkness that was to come. None could dream that their army, the Squats, the Slan, would become a cautionary tale that would evoke such dread from the gamers of the future. For it was in the year 1990 that a new release of rules occurred. Back then, Games Workshop was seen as a small company of mad nerds who had some very zany ideas. Good ideas, but nothing serious. They were oft seen as a bit of an eccentric uncle or cousin, who was always entertaining, but oft unfathomable. When the new rules came out and there was no mention, no listing, no order of battle for the Squats, all shrugged and gave a worldly chortle and shook their heads. Games Workshop had forgotten to put in the pages in all of their excitement for the release. Over the next period of a few years, GW did finally release an order of battle and some costs, but in our blindness, without the experience we have today, we all assumed that they had done this so nonchalantly and so half-heartedly, as they were running late on a full book, and this was merely a stopgap to tide us over. Things moved more slowly then. When they brought out figures for a squat army in Epic, an old game played on an entire army scale, where titans were the size of modern dreadnoughts, and hundreds of bases of squads of infantry could cover a table and give the feel of an epic war, we laughed again. Silly old GW, we said in our innocence. They have still not got the squat rules out for their main game. Again, we chortled. It was later, in the mid-90s, that the horror was made plain. There were to be no new models. There were to be no more rules. With dumbfound slack-jawed naivety we looked on, always thinking this a jape or a way to drive interest for when the new release would inevitably drop. We stood by and did nothing but laugh. But we were wrong. So very wrong. But time moved on and the shelves remained empty. Finally the horror was revealed, was unavoidable, all hope crushed, dispelled. It was when Jervis Johnson, may the Emperor bless his name, an architect of Games Workshop and one of its greatest lights, was giving an interview that the confirmation came down. There would be no more squats. The army had been discontinued. The reasons, there are many that I have explored, but only 3 I will divulge now. Jervis stated that it was due to none of the creative team having a passion for the army. He relentlessly piled on, adding insult to injury, stating that GW thought the Space Dwarves, the Squats, had become a parody of the proud dwarves of Warhammer fantasy, and there was not the creative will, nor the muse, in operation in even a single one of their creators, with enough power to formulate a way to take them in a new direction. Jervis stated it boldly. There was not the love for the Squats at GW to keep them alive. In that instant, the horror was confirmed. The horror was born. The Dark Reaper was loosed, and terror had a new name. A thing was born to be squatted. Its power grew, and it also consumed the entire army of the Slan, who were in Rogue Trader and were the proto-entity that developed more fully into the old ones of today. Back then, they were an army akin to lizardmen in space. They too were struck down by this ghoul, this wraith. They were discontinued as well, but ever after they were seen as being squatted. Though it would be equally valid to say an army had been slanned, it has never caught on. References would still be made to them on occasion over the next half-decade, but then the purge began. The squat characters from books of the Black Library were amended, adjusted and reprinted, and the squats were gone. They had been redacted. They had been expunged from their list to their last. The squats were written out of the entire universe. But I feel two other reasons are in play, and I would never argue with the word of Jervis. All hail his name. I feel that a lack of sales may have opened the door, but it was also a need to assert the individuality of Warhammer 40k, to make it distinct from fantasy, and there was indeed a drive from Games Workshop entire to break the two apart. Books like The Lost and the Damned and Slaves to Darkness, which contained entries for the Chaos Gods, made it seem the worlds were interchangeable and linked, but the new directive was to make them distinct. Thankfully, they could not sacrifice their Eldar, as their sales were strong, their fans formidable, and their aesthetic exquisite. It could not be the Eldar, the Space Elves. So it had to be the less popular dwarves that would be sacrificed. Henceforth all could say, "Well no, it's not just fantasy and space, there are no dwarves, mate." The third reason, in my mind, is very simple indeed. Models. In all the adoration of the fluff, mood and rules, some forget that the essential element of Warhammer is indubitably the models. Games Workshop make models. My heart tells me that the squats were also sacrificed to the altar of the newly developed Volker Fenrica, the Space Bulls. In Rogue Trader, the Space Wolves were not as they are today, but in the 90s they were fast developing, forming, becoming distinct. I know, I had an army of them, but they were Viking-like warriors. They hailed from cold, snow-covered mountainous terrain. But most importantly, the iconography, the visual lexicon that makes them who they are, drew from Viking and Celtic designs and feels. This was previously held for the dwarves, but the two could not cohabit at that time. Big-bearded berserkers with axes drinking whores on wolf motifs? The only difference betwixt them would have been, laughably enough, height alone. The Space Marines were a runaway success, and their advent was like a thunderbolt on the game scene. But it took a few years to really pick up speed. As it did, the iconography that would have made a model for a dwarf was simply hijacked by the new on-vogue Space Wolves. All the love of the Viking, plaited or shaggy beard, the axe and shield went to the Volker Fenrica. With all of these factors, plus more to boot, the choice was simple. The squats would have to go. Forever onwards they would need to be used only as proxies, or be subjected to the vile debasement, in some people's opinion, of the homebrew codex or army list. Pick up games at any but your own club with your own friends were now impossible. The squats were gone. And so the new evil, the new word, entered the lexicon of the Warhammer fanbase, and it has spread to other gamers. To be squatted. To be discontinued by GW. To be consigned to the annals of history and retelling around a pub fire only. They had been written out of existence. Many a fan of that period, the Rogue Traders, shed a single tear. But it was not a tear for the squats alone, oh no. It was a tear elicited by the knowledge that this evil had been given life at all. That now that it was freed, now that it had been fed, this terror would stalk all and every gamer, every army, every campaign and setting, every book or narrative, and to the end of time. Anyone and anything could now be squatted. They were right to shed a tear, and they were right to fear. The terror arose again to feast on some of the sideline games, and failed Battlefleet Gothic, and the result of the 13th Black Crusade, both devoured and squatted, or retconned, which is, undeniably, another variant of being squatted. The power of this evil, the squatting, then slumbered. But we were not to know that it was to arise more powerful than ever before. As stated, it slumbered so long that it was thought to be dead, a thing of the past. Its sting was lessened with every passing year, and we thought it would never arise again. But it did, and oh, how it arose. So powerful was it, for it had hungered so during its slumber, that it could now not be sated, and when it arose it claimed an entire game setting. No side game, no mini-project, no failing endeavour. It came and ate the entire old world. In its lust, it destroyed the original game from which all else had sprung. It consumed the old world of fantasy Warhammer in its entirety. Even so, this was not all, for the setting had been squatted, had been fed to this mighty beast, but more. 2 armies in one gulp did it maul. The Tomb Kings and the Bretonnians fell, both squatted. Over the next few years, the squatting quietly continued as armies, units and features were sacrificed to it. The High Elves were shattered into a million sub-factions, like Caleb and Chicane of the Grim Future, and from there the beast ate and ate. Without a cohesive force organization to stop it, the Elves were squatted 1 unit at a time. The barbarity of it still goes on, nor can anyone ever truly escape the fear. For no matter how popular your army may be now, time can change all things. You may not believe me, but once upon a time the Crimson Fists were the poster boys of the Imperium. Then the torch was passed to the Black Templars for a spell. Only recently, during the reign of he who I will only refer to as the Dark One, for I cannot speak his name, did the sons of Gulliman, the Ultramarines, reached the heady status of being the most favoured of GW. They have held this mantle for some time, but even this can change. None are now safe. For there is ultimately very little one can do to avert a squatting. There are folk tales. Some say that you may avert its gaze by always avoiding recasts, eBay, and discount sites, and give supplication to GW by buying at least 1 box of figures for your army directly from a Games Workshop store or their website on each of the solstice. Some say that you can make the Dark Spectre of Death avoid your army by somehow gaining consistent representation on the top tables of tournaments. Some say that to ensure that the evil eye does not touch your force can only be achieved by winning armies on parade every year. There are hopes that the figure they brought out only recently for Necromunda, a squat, will eventually lead to a return of the line. Other superstitions say that the squats will rise up again under a new name, the allies of the Tau, the Demiurge. But the court is still out on that one, and only time will tell. But these are superstitions. None can truly say. None can give a lasting formula for the defeat of this evil, this scourge, the squatting. All one can do is enjoy the time you have now, here with your army, while it still exists. Love your models, paint your models, name and festoon the bases of your models, for you never know when they may be gone. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you have lasted to the end of this spine-chilling tale, then please do consider liking and subscribing. If you are a regular gentle listener and see value in what we are doing, then do consider supporting us on Patreon, if your resources permit. Now, no matter what you may do today, spend some time with your models and your hobby. You just never know. And do try to make some time for fun today. Toodaloo.